The letter arrived on a Tuesday, which Maren Ashford would later think was fitting. Tuesdays had always been the worst day of the week, the day her mother died, the day the solicitor had come to Thornfield House with papers she was not allowed to read, the day everything ordinary turned quietly catastrophic. She read it standing in the hallway of her lodgings in Bath. Still wearing her coat, her fingers going cold against the envelope. The handwriting was her cousin Reginald's. Fat, self-satisfied loop she had known since childhood. And the message was brief in the way that only truly devastating things can afford to be brief. The estate has been transferred. The new owner takes possession of Thornfield next month. I suggest you make arrangements accordingly. No salutation. No signature. Just that. And a postscript in smaller letters, do not attempt to contest this. Father's will was quite clear. Maren folded the letter in half, then in half again, then set it on the hall table beside the wilting arrangement of dried lavender that her landlady, Mrs. Potts, refreshed every other Sunday without fail. She stood there for a long moment. Outside, a cart horse clopped past on the cobblestones. A child was laughing somewhere down the street. Thornfield House. 200 acres in the Derbyshire hills, a library that smelled of cedar and old bindings, a kitchen garden her mother had planted with her own hands in the year before the fever came. Maren had grown up running barefoot across its upper lawns. She had learned to read in its east-facing morning room, light coming in sideways across the floorboards. She had sat with her father there in his final weeks, reading aloud from his favorite histories while he slept in the chair beside the window, too proud to go upstairs to bed. And now a stranger owned it. She went upstairs, sat on the edge of her narrow rented bed, and thought about what she was actually willing to do. The answer surprised her. It took 3 weeks to arrange. She wrote to Mrs. Garvey, the housekeeper at Thornfield, who had known Maren since she was 4 years old and who had, in the quiet years since Maren's father declined, quietly kept her informed of the estate's condition. Mrs. Garvey was a practical woman who had survived 2 difficult masters and 1 disastrous roof collapse, and had opinions about most things, especially about what she called the proper order of houses. "The new owner is a Lord Caldwell," Mrs. Garvey wrote back in her characteristic economy of language. "Viscount. Young. Made his money in shipping before inheriting the title. He is not what I expected. He asked the names of all the staff on his first day and remembered them a week later. I do not know what to make of him. The house needs a lady's maid. If you are serious, come before the end of the month. I will say you are a niece of a friend of mine from Harrogate. Do not tell me what you intend to do. I prefer not to know." Maren was serious. She arrived at Thornfield on a gray October morning, wearing a plain dark dress she had purchased second-hand, and her hair done simply, the way women in service wore it, tucked back, contained, offering nothing. The carriage let her off at the top of the lane, and she walked the remaining quarter-mile on foot because she had asked to be let off early. She needed a moment before she saw the house. It looked the same. That was the first thing that hit her. The specific cruelty of how unchanged it was, the pale stone front, the ivy going copper and amber in the autumn cold, the 3 chimneys against the white sky. A house does not mourn. It simply stands there, indifferent to who walks through its doors. She walked through them. Mrs. Garvey met her in the back passage and said nothing more than Miss Hollis, which was the name they had agreed upon, and handed her a clean apron and a list of her duties. Maren noted that the housekeeper did not quite meet her eyes. She was grateful for that. Her name was Maren Hollis now. She had been a lady's maid in Harrogate for 4 years. She had references written in a hand that was not quite her own, and a careful flatness to her vowels that she had practiced in her lodgings until it felt almost natural. She knew how to be unremarkable. She had spent the last 2 years learning, in the blunt school of reduced circumstances, how to fold herself down to fit whatever space was available. She did not know how long she intended to stay. She had not thought that far. What she knew was that Thornfield was being systematically altered. Furniture sold off, tenants quietly pressured, the east wing already shuttered, and that no one was watching except her. She met Lord Caldwell on her 3rd day. He came in from riding earlier than expected and encountered her in the library, where she had been supposed to be dusting the upper shelves, but had, in a moment of weakness, climbed down from the ladder and opened one of the volumes on the reading desk. It was a first edition. Her father had bought it at auction and been enormously pleased with himself about it for several months afterward. She had her hand flat on the open page when she heard the door. She closed it quickly. Not quickly enough. "You read Latin?" Lord Caldwell said. He was younger than she had imagined from Mrs. Garvey's description. Perhaps 30, perhaps a year or two less, with a kind of face that seemed arranged for skepticism. Dark eyes that noted things. A mouth that gave very little away. He was still in his riding coat carrying his gloves, and he was looking at her with an expression she could not immediately categorize. "A little, my lord," Maren said. She kept her eyes at the appropriate level. Not quite meeting his, not quite deferential either, the neutral middle distance of domestic service. "I apologize. I should not have touched it." "The book is meant to be read," he said. Which was not the response she expected. He crossed to the desk, looked at the volume she had left. "Cicero. Were you finding it interesting?" "I was finding it familiar," she said, before she could stop herself. There was a brief silence. His eyes moved to her face with something that might have been curiosity, and she felt the familiar cold slide of having said too much. "I'll continue with the shelves," she said. "Yes," he said. "Do." She climbed back up the ladder. She heard him settle into the chair at the desk, her father's chair, and after a moment, the quiet sound of pages turning. She learned the shape of him in pieces, the way you learn any landscape you are moving through carefully. He rose early and often did not come down for breakfast, working instead from correspondence that arrived in substantial quantities and that he answered personally, in longhand, which was unusual enough that the footman remarked on it. He had dismissed the previous steward within 2 weeks of arriving. A man named Mr. Brent, who had, by Maren's careful reconstruction, been systematically skimming from the tenant accounts for at least 3 years. Lord Caldwell had done this quietly, without drama, and had installed a younger man from his own solicitor's office, who came up from London monthly and who seemed, irritatingly, to know what he was doing. He did not entertain. He had no guests in the 6 weeks she was there, no shooting parties, no house parties, no stream of county neighbors coming to assess the new owner of Thornfield. She gathered from Mrs. Garvey, in the careful way she gathered everything, obliquely in passing over the arrangement of linen, that he had been at Thornfield only a matter of months before that and had spent most of his adult life between London and the Continent. "He doesn't know what he has," Maren said once to no one in particular, standing at the library window watching him walk the south field alone in the late afternoon light, hands clasped behind his back, stopping occasionally to look at the drainage ditch that had been silting up since her father's illness. "He's fixing the ditch," Mrs. Garvey said from directly behind her, which meant she had heard. Maren said nothing. The housekeeper set a pile of freshly counted lemons on the table and said, with great evenness, "He asked about the history of the south field. I told him your father had it redrained in 1862. He asked who your father was." Maren's hands were very still. "What did you say?" "I said the previous owner's family had held it for 4 generations. That's all." She turned to look at Mrs. Garvey, who was arranging linens with perfect concentration. "Thank you," Maren said. "I didn't do anything," the housekeeper said. The document came to light on a Sunday. Maren had developed the habit, carefully, over weeks, in small increments, of spending her half-day off in the estate office, on the pretense of organizing old household ledgers, which genuinely needed organizing and which Lord Caldwell's new steward had no particular interest in. The estate office held 30 years of records. It also held, as she had suspected since childhood and confirmed in the second week, a locked lower drawer of the main cabinet that her father had always kept locked and that Reginald's solicitors had apparently overlooked when clearing the estate. She did not have the key. She had been working on this problem for 3 Sundays. On the 4th Sunday, she found that the lock had been changed. New brass fittings, a key still in the lock. She stood very still for a moment, then opened it. Inside were two folders. The first contained correspondence between her cousin Reginald and a solicitor she did not recognize, dated over a period of 18 months, leading up to her father's death. The second contained something she had not expected, a signed letter from her father, dated 6 months before he died, addressed to his own solicitor, stating clearly that it was his intention that Thornfield pass to his daughter Maren Ashford in its entirety, and that any subsequent alterations to this document should be considered under duress. Her hands were shaking. She sat down on the floor of the estate office, among 30 years of household ledgers, and read the letter 4 times. "The drawer was locked when I arrived," said Lord Caldwell from the doorway. She looked up. He was standing with his arms at his sides, watching her. He had clearly been there for some time. "I had it rekeyed," he said, "and opened. I read those documents last week." The shaking in her hands moved into her arms. She pressed the letter flat against her knees. "My name," she said, "is not Maren Hollis." "I know," he said. "You know. You had your hand on the Cicero like someone who had touched it 100 times before," he said. "And you know where the candles are kept in the 3rd-floor linen press, which is not somewhere a new lady's maid would know. And Mrs. Garvey looks at you the way people look at someone they are protecting." He paused. "I had you investigated 3 weeks ago. I'm sorry. It felt necessary." The apology landed in a strange way, off-center, like something she hadn't known she needed. "Then you know what those documents mean," she said. "They mean your cousin defrauded you," he said. "With the likely assistance of at least one solicitor and possibly a cooperative judge, yes." He crossed the room and sat down in the office chair, not towering over her, which she noticed. "I've had my own solicitor reviewing the matter since Monday. It's not simple. The will that was executed is legal on its face. Contesting it requires evidence of undue influence at the time of signing, and your father's letter, while compelling, was written 6 months prior." "But it exists," she said. "It exists," he said. "And it changes things." She looked at him. He was watching her steadily, with that same expression she had never quite been able to categorize. Not pity, not detachment, not the polite distance of someone managing a difficult situation. Something else. "Why did you open the drawer?" she asked. "Because it was locked when everything else had been gone through," he said. "And things that are specifically locked in the middle of everything else that's been deliberately cleared usually means someone was hiding something." He looked at the folder in her hands. "I bought Thornfield at auction. I had no reason to believe anything was irregular. When I found reason to believe it, I thought you deserved to know what I found. You could have simply—" She stopped. "Ignored it," he said. "Kept the house on grounds that the sale was technically legal." He said it without heat, as though considering the option from a distance. "I could have. Why didn't you?" He was quiet for a moment. Outside, the wind came through the elm at the corner of the house in the particular way it did in October, a low sound that she had known her whole childhood. "Because you climbed back up that ladder," he said finally, "and kept dusting the shelves, even after you'd given yourself away. There was something very determined about it. I found it." He paused, choosing the word with some care. "Admirable." What followed was not simple, because nothing involving solicitors and contested wills and fraudulent estate sales is ever simple. Lord Caldwell's solicitor came up from London and spent a week at Thornfield going through records. Maren gave a formal account of everything she knew, which was more than she had told anyone, laid out in chronological order across 3 days of careful conversation in the library. Her cousin Reginald, when contacted, denied everything with the specific fluency of someone who had been rehearsing the denial for some time. Maren moved out of the servants' quarters and into the East Wing guest room at Lord Caldwell's suggestion, offered quietly and without ceremony. She accepted it on the same terms. They ate dinner together 3 times that week, in the absence of any particular structure to prevent it, at the long table in the smaller dining room that had always been used for family rather than guests. She told him about her father, about the library, about the kitchen garden. He asked questions with the attentiveness of someone who was genuinely trying to understand a thing rather than simply being polite. On the fourth evening she asked him why he had bought Thornfield in the first place. He set down his glass. "I was looking for somewhere that felt like it had been a real home," he said, "rather than a house someone had built to demonstrate something." Thornfield looked. He considered it. Lived in the right way. She looked around the dining room, the wallpaper her mother had chosen, the sideboard that had been in her father's family for 80 years. "It was," she said. He looked at her. "It still is." The legal resolution took 4 months, which was faster than anyone expected and slower than Maren could bear. The solicitor Reginald had engaged was quietly struck from the rolls. Reginald himself, faced with the documentary evidence and the specific quality of attention that Lord Caldwell's legal team brought to bear, agreed to a settlement rather than a public proceeding, which Maren accepted because she was tired and because a public proceeding would have taken 2 more years and cost her things she did not have to spend. Thornfield was returned to her. She stood in the entrance hall on the February morning that the final papers were signed. In the plain dark dress she still wore sometimes out of habit, and felt something release in her chest that she had been holding since that Tuesday in Bath when the letter came. Lord Caldwell. Nicholas, she had started to think of him, though she had never said it aloud, was in the library. She found him there in the good chair, not her father's, the one that faced the window, with a letter open in his lap and the particular stillness of someone waiting to learn something. "It's done," she said. He set the letter aside. "Congratulations, Miss Ashford." "Maren," she said. She said it without particular intention, and then felt the weight of it settle between them, acknowledged. He was quiet for a moment. Then, "What will you do with it?" She looked out the library window at the south field, the drainage ditch that was clear now. The stone wall he had repaired in November because it needed repairing. The kitchen garden was bare and frost-hardened. But she had already written to a woman in Bakewell who knew about kitchen gardens, who had told her what would be possible in spring. "Restore the tenancies," she said. "Fix the east wing roof. Plant the kitchen garden in March, if the ground unfreezes." She paused. "Stay." He said nothing. The silence had a texture to it that she had learned to read over 4 months, the way she had learned to read most things about him. "You are welcome to stay as well," she said, keeping her voice very even, "if that is something you would consider, in whatever capacity." "Maren," he said. She stopped. "Don't make it a business proposition," he said, and the thing in his voice was careful and warm and entirely without the performance of either, "unless you want it to be." She didn't want it to be. The elm moved in the February wind outside. The house stood the way it had always stood, patient and pale and full of light in the east-facing morning room, waiting, as houses do, for whatever came next. She told him she didn't want it to be, and that, finally, was enough.